take more sips of coffee. I'm figuring this out. And this has to be another serious one. I did not want to do a serious one, but here I am. So this is going to be about mass psychosis. I think we're in the middle of it. And a thing called menticide. Killing of the mind. And again, where I'm getting my information are the top people in their fields. So I'll kind of point out when I'm giving my own thoughts so you can give that much less credence. But I'll do a lot of quoting and you'll see why, and I think things are going to click. But first I have to, and I think this is a good idea I came up with. I'm going to post up here a tiny little description of the people that I'm going to be quoting from. One guy's name is Gustave Le Bon. Try to pronounce these things right, but I probably don't. Carl Jung, you probably heard of him in high school. If not, you will in college. Silvano Ariete. Sounds Italian, huh? Arthur Vesleuus. Hannah Arendt. Joost Meerloo. That's a cool name. Václav Havel. That's another cool name. This guy he's kind of experienced what we're going to talk about. So I give him a lot of weight. And then Thomas Paine. You should have read about Thomas Paine in high school. He has pretty good savvy. So without further ado, we're going to talk about mass psychosis. Now this is a quote by Gustave Le Bon. The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduce them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their masters. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusion is always their victim. That's a pretty good quote. Carl Jung comes along and he says, quote, civilization's biggest threat is our inability to deal with the forces of our own psyche. Get it? We are our own worst enemy. He states that man is a wolf to man. And in most cases, it plays into society's mental illness. So when a society treats mental illness as a norm and not the exception, this is a psychic epidemic. Now I'm going to put the definition of some of these words, not because I think you're stupid, but because I'm kind of stupid and I had to look these up because I want to be precise. And I'll put some of those up here so you get a better understanding of what psychosis and all that stuff means. Anyway, Carl Jung went on to say this is worse than natural catastrophes. So mass psychosis, always have to say that so I know how to spell it. Mass psychosis is an epidemic of madness, and it occurs when a large portion of society loses touch with reality and descends into delusions. Number page 1. Okay, here's the example from the 16th century. The American and European witch hunts. If you haven't read about that, you should. It's mind-boggling what these people were doing. And then number 2, we'll talk about totalitarianism in the 20th century. But back in the witch hunts, there were thousands burned at the stake. I didn't know there was thousands. Not for any crimes, but they were scapegoats of a society that had gone mad. In some French villages, there were scarcely any women left. Now think about that. These guys are burning their women at the stake. That boggles my mind. But not just in America, but also in Europe. How can that be? How could that ever happen? Well, this is just one example. I mean, we could probably go through history and find a lot of examples, but this one sticks out. Jung studied this and found that the ones that made up the infected society became morally and spiritually inferior. They sank unconsciously to an inferior intellectual level. They became more unreasonable, irresponsible, emotional, erratic, and unreliable. Worst of all, they would commit crimes they would individually never commit. You see that in riots. You see guys get caught up in riots. They would never break car windows and burn down buildings. They're caught up in the mob, a mob mentality. Anyways, Jung goes on to say they were smitten by the group madness. Just what I said. Those suffering from a mass psychosis are unaware of what is occurring. They cannot step outside the mob to observe their collective madness. This, get it? We would call it a frenzy. They're worked up in a frenzy. They can't see they're worked up in a frenzy. They can't do it. Okay, what causes a mass psychosis? First, look at what drives an individual mad. Maybe drugs, alcohol, etc., brain injuries or other illnesses, but we're going to talk about psychological triggers, or what's called a psychogenic trigger. The most prevalent psychogenic psychosis is a flood of negative emotions. That's fear and anxiety. The fear and anxiety that drives a person into a state of panic. A person in a state of panic will always seek to relieve it. It simply is too draining to subsist this way. Escaping can be done by facing the fears and by deflecting the fears. Some escape by undergoing a psychotic break. This is not a descent into a greater disorder, but it is a reordering of one's experiential world. It blends fact and fiction, or delusion and reality. This helps in the feeling of panic. Silvano Ariete, there's a couple of phases that go on. First is the phase of panic. When a patient sees things in a different way, they get frightened, confused. They can't explain the strange things that are happening. That's the phase of panic. So the second thing that happens is what he calls psychotic insight. This is where the person succeeds in putting this together by devising a pathological way of seeing reality, which allows them to explain their abnormal experiences. It's called insight because the patient finally sees meaning and relations in the experiences. But the insight is psychotic because it is based on delusions, not on adaptive and life-promoting ways of relating to the threats. The delusions allow the panicked patient to escape from the flood of negative emotions. Are you getting this? Still at a cost of losing touch with reality, this is an abnormal way of dealing with an extreme state of anxiety. Remember the witch trials. Okay. And you're going to see as I start explaining this, you're going to, your lens will focus in on, hey, that's happening now. Let me go on. And this, to quote, if a panic-triggered flood of negative emotions while in a weak, vulnerable individual can trigger a psychotic break, then mass psychosis can result when a population of weak and vulnerable individuals are driven into a state of panic by threats real, imagined, or fabricated. Delusions can take many forms. Madness can manifest itself in many ways. Mass psychosis will differ based on the historical and cultural content. In the modern era, it is totalitarianism that is the greatest threat. Close quote. All right. Now, I'm going to switch to a guy named Arthur Versluis. Versluis. Maybe it's Versluis. He says totalitarianism is the modern phenomenon of total centralized state power coupled with the obliteration of individual human rights. In a totalized state, there are those in power and those objectified masses, the victims, he calls them. In a totalitarian society, there are two groups, the rulers and the ruled. Both groups undergo a pathological transformation. Both groups do. The rulers are elevated to almost a godlike status. This is diametrically opposed to our natures as flawed beings who are easily corrupted by power. The masses, on the other hand, are transformed into dependent subjects. Think about North Korea. If you've ever watched a documentary, you'll see how they treat their leader like gods. Fact is, there was just sparked a memory. There was a documentary where a doctor went to North Korea. He specialized in a certain surgery that brought sight to blind people. Whether it was reconnecting an optic nerve or whatever. So he treated, I think in a documentary, they actually showed about 5, but he treated quite a few. And what was interesting, every public room always has a picture frame of what's their leader's called? I forgot his name. Anyways, so when they would take the bandages off, now these people, I guess they were sighted and then they've been blind for many, many years. Now they can see. And here's the doctor in front of them responsible for that. You think they went over and shook his hand? They went right past him and went right straight to that picture, and they praised their leader and they bowed down and they literally worshipped him. Didn't give the doctor time of day. That's the kind of mass psychosis we're talking about. It's real. The masses take on a psychologically repressed and childlike status, and that's what you see in North Korea. So now it's been 16 minutes. I'm going to take a tiny little break here. Alright. Okay, now that brings us to Hannah Arendt. She says totalitarianism's attempt to transformation of human nature itself turns sound minds into sick minds. Well, that's kind of obvious. And Josh Merleau, You may read about him in college. He's pretty famous. Says there is much that is comparable between the strange reaction of the citizen of totalitarianism and their culture as a whole on one hand, and the reactions of the sick schizophrenic on the other hand. It is built and sustained by delusions. Only deluded men and women regress to the childlike status of obedience and submissive subjects that hand over complete control of their lives to politicians. Right? Only a deluded ruling class believe that they possess the knowledge, wisdom, and acumen to completely control society in a top-down manner. Only one under the spell of delusion would anyone believe that a society of those rulers/masses would lead to anything other than mass suffering and social ruin. Still quoting this guy. He says, what leads to this triggering of mass psychosis? It always begins in the ruling class. They are prone to delusions that augment their power, i.e. the delusion that they should control and dominate society. Ideologues of communism, fascism, or technocracy have a first step in convincing the masses to accept their rules by infecting them with the mass psychosis of totalitarianism. Merleau goes on to explain, it is simply a question of reorganizing and manipulating collective feelings in the proper way. He calls this menticide, the killing of the mind. Merleau said that menticide is an old crime against the human mind and spirit, but systemized a new way. It is an organized system of psychological intervention and judicial perversion through which a ruling class can imprint their own opportunistic thoughts upon the minds of those they plan to use and destroy. Priming a population for the crime of menticide begins with a sowing of fears. Remember that in how you start the descent into panic, and then you do a psychotic break. The best technique to use is what's called the waves of terror. Now, I spent a lot of time on this diagram. It's pretty technical, but here it is. And you will notice, if it's in focus, that this says rear, but it should say fear. That's my 2-year-old handwriting. So let's look at this. I hope you can see it. So this is the best way. You have fear and calm, fear and calm. But more fear, more fear. See how the frequency's getting, the fears are coming closer and closer? But he found out that if you can calm someone, the next fear is progressively higher. So here's my timeline. This is what he noticed, that fear is always driven by propaganda, so you get more and more and more propaganda. And as time goes on, morality goes down. That's what he found out historically. All right? I think your eyes are being opened now. So, while fear primes a population to menticide, the use of propaganda to spread misinformation and promote confusion with respect to that source is the threat. All this helps to break down the mind. Okay? That's what they've done in the past, and you see them doing it right now. Government officials are the media. Government officials and the media. I have my $5 glasses on instead of my $1 glasses. You'd think I could read this a little bit better. Start over. The government officials and the media use contradictory reports, nonsensical information, and blatant lies to make the masses less capable to cope with a crisis, less able to diminish their fears in a rational, adaptive way. I've been saying this for a long time. We're in a psyops war. Back to quoting. Confusion heightens the susceptibility of a descent into the delusion of totalitarianism. All right? Merleau says, logic can be met with logic, but illogic cannot. It confuses those who think straight. The big lie, monotonally repeated nonsense have more of an emotional appeal than logic and reason. That just didn't sound possible, but it is. It's how it works. While the people are still searching for a reasonable counter-argument to the first lie, the totalitarian assaults them with another lie. Right? That's that wave. Now think about social media. Never before have such effective means existed. Algorithms to censor the flow of information to assault the mind of the masses. Think about what's going on today. AI. I don't mean to scare you about AI. That's something we need to really know about. But you've got UFOs come in and out of the news, right? Nuclear war. And nothing. Oh, nuclear war. Did no mention. Oh, there's nuclear war on the horizon. Constitutional rights are being destroyed. No, they're not. Supreme Court will establish that. Oh, calm. No, they're being destroyed. Oh, I got fear again. No, Supreme Court. Oh, I'm calm again. What about climate change? Well, we all know it was global warming is going to kill us. Ice age is going to kill us. No, it's not. Up and down. The economy is going to collapse. Well, that might happen. And all this whole thing that I've just laid out is being used on us. So the people that are already close to a psychotic break have a psychotic break. Why are there so many mass shootings? Why are there so many suicides? They are breaking, that's menticide, right? They're killing our minds, they're doing everything. So think about these addictions. Think personally. Social media is an addiction. This is my addiction. News is an addiction. I felt so much better when I was in the hospital and I didn't even look at the news for a week. I calmed way down. Music is an addiction. What are you listening to? Think about it. Is it good for you? Not just that it sounds cool. That stuff's getting into your subconscious. Movies are an addiction. I used to be addicted to movies. I just watch a lot of them. I can't even watch movies anymore. We have a lot of movies. I can watch the older ones, but any of the newer ones, I just have no interest. Name your addiction. You've got one. We all do. See, the Bible tells us to judge ourselves so that others won't need to judge us. It's a good idea to just step back and look at yourself. All right, back to it. It says, we have no time to retreat and reflect. Technology urges us on. No rest, no meditation. The senses are overloaded with stimuli. That's the point, is to overload your senses. Soon we stop questioning the screen. Still, the totalitarian takes more steps to disrupt us. They want to isolate normal social interactions, i.e., alone, reflecting, or to get together with friends, family, and co-workers. They want to disrupt that so that you are more susceptible to delusion. It goes on to say we lose contact with the corrective force of the positive example. Not everyone is tricked. Some can help others from the menticide assault. You need to find someone that's got their act together. If isolation is enforced, the power of the positive examples are greatly diminished. Another reason for isolation is because it is easier to condition us into new patterns of thought. Pavlov, everybody knows about Pavlov and the ringing the bell and the dogs would salivate. He found a conditioned reflex is developed easier in a quiet, isolated laboratory, no outside stimuli. So they're giving you all kinds of stimuli, but you don't get a chance to get outside of that. They're killing your mind. The never-ending stream of propaganda turns rational minds into a playhouse of irrational forces, with chaos being the goal. The masses crave an ordered world. Now the totalitarian takes the decisive step in offering a way out, a return to order. But it comes at a price, the price of freedom. You must become obedient and submissive. You must descend into the delusion of totalitarian psychosis. Think of a totalitarianism in the 20th century. There's a lot of them to pick. No reason, no human decency, only the atmosphere of terror. The projection of the enemy imagined to be in our midst. Ooh, there's a mole. There's a guy that's, you know what I mean, starts turning neighbors against neighbors. Society turned in on itself, urged on by the rulers. This kind of society rids life of so many joys. Joys that drive societies forward. It breeds stagnation, destruction, and death. Actually, that last sentence was mine. How do we prevent all that? Even if we are in the early stages. So I've scared you, opened your eyes. Now how do we deal with it? How do we prevent it? One sounds easy. Step one is bring order to your mind, then live in a way that inspires others. Okay, now you can figure that out. Our age cries out for the emancipated personality, the one that has been set free of the grip of the collective psychosis, the one that has lit the beacon of hope. Find that guy. Number two, information that has centered the propaganda that has countered. See, these are even my own thoughts. Forgot to tell you that. Number two, information that has countered the propaganda must be spread afar. Speak truth to lies. All right? Treat the demagogues as dictators with ridicule. Demagogues are incapable of humor. You can see that, right? They collapse under it. Now, back to somebody that's way smarter than I am, and his name is Václav Havel. Create parallel structures, he says. Any form of organizations, business, institutions, technology, or creative pursuit that exists within a totalitarian society physically, but is morally outside of it. Okay, get this? This is more effective than political action. Enough parallel structures formed can create an enclave of freedom and sanity. These are areas where a different life can be lived, a life of harmony with its own aims, a self-organized social structure. Then Havel, you know what I'm talking about. He says, above all else, actions by as many people as possible. An active and concerted effort must be done to move the world forward toward freedom. Now, Thomas Paine, there's lots of quotes from him. He's been around a while. This is a quote that I liked. It said, tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. So I'll leave you with this. Hitch your wagon to a freedom movement, but vet that movement. Make sure, because some of them sound good, sound cool. Maybe they even just have a cool name. But make sure that they reflect your values, right? Make sure that you guys are on the same page so that you can pour your heart into it. Cut the strings that bind. Self-reflect, stand back from this stuff. Take a look at this is going to kill my mind. Cut those strings, all right? You got to do it, or we're all just going to go into this mass psychosis. Do the noble thing. There you go. Like I said, last 3 or 4 videos, I hope to do some fun stuff. Maybe this will be my last serious one for a little while. It kind of takes it out of me. I do a lot of research. I take a lot of notes. I try to put this together for you guys. I hope that it pierces through that mass psychosis psyops that they're bombing us with. This is a war of the minds. This is serious stuff. With that, I do love you guys. Stay tuned. I will make the next one fun somehow. Bye.